Hi, everybody, and welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas. My name is David Capes, and I am the Senior Research Fellow at the library and a former faculty member at Wheaton College. Our purpose in these podcasts is very simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, so that we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it, but also to live it. Joining me today is the principal of Tyndale House, Dr. Peter J. Williams. Thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you.
We are together on Zoom in the years of COVID, or the months of COVID at least. Hopefully it won't go into years. But thanks for agreeing to be a part of this. We're going to talk today about Matthew 5. Before we do that, though, I'm curious, how did you learn to read Greek? Where did or was it Hebrew your first language? I don't remember.
I actually began with Greek when I was 14, so I was able to go to a school, what you'd call a high school in Yorkshire, in England, where we could learn Greek. So Latin at age 12 and Greek from age 14. And so I think I'd read the New Testament in Greek before I even went to university. And so, it's great to be able to get that under your belt and then just go back and study more. And
so you started early. There's a story out of Tyndale House years ago when I think Ralph Martin and F.F. Bruce were together at a meal. And Ralph Martin said to Fred Bruce, he said, "Do you think a person can master Greek if they have not already done so by the age of 14? And F.F. Bruce said, "No, I don't think they can." So such a downer. But you starting early very much helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I think you can start late. I want to encourage people. It's never too late to start.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're 18 or 22 or older or 52
or 80. Why not start Greek at 80?
Yeah, keep your mind sharp.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk about Matthew 5 today.
Mm-hmm.
You had a really interesting kind of a take on this, not just so much about the meaning of words, but also the sound of words.
Yes, so I mean, I believe that Jesus taught in Greek and in Aramaic. A lot of people tend to think he only taught in Aramaic, and I think part of that is a hangover from the Romantic movement, where people love the idea of a Jesus who isn't influenced by Greek culture or Greek education and language at all. But when you look at what's called the Sermon on the Mount, but really is the Lesson on the Mount. It's not called a sermon. It's Jesus taught them, and I don't think he just said those words for 12 minutes. Yep. He's teaching people, I presumably teaching them to memorize it, and that's why he gives them memory aids. So the first four Beatitudes begin with the letter pi. So it's blessed are the poor in spirit. The word poor begins with pi, as does the word spirit, pneuma. Then those who mourn, that's with a pi. Those who are meek, with a pi. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, hunger begins with a pi. And then he will talk about the pure in heart. Pure is katharoi, begins with ka. Heart, cardia, ka. Then he will talk about those who are persecuted for righteousness. And then it's dedion menoi, di, for righteousness, begins with a di. As does thirsting for righteousness, begins di. And so on. And in fact, all of these Beatitudes have sound correlations in them. They have assonance. Even blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Probably back in the pronunciation of those days, the ending of peacemakers would be uu, which would be the same as the sound you would have for sons, uu. Or huioi, as people might learn it. Okay. And so there's sound correlations here, things that help you remember it. Like when Jesus says in the same lesson, beware, beginning PRO, of false prophets, with a PRO in, of course, for prophets. They come to you in the clothing of sheep, which begins PRO, probaton is word for sheep, and lots of other things like this. And the context is this lesson is to people from lots of different places, including the Decapolis. That's in Matthew 4:25, and those the Decapolis are Greek-speaking cities. And of course, Greek speakers would not be likely to learn Aramaic, but Aramaic speakers might have to learn Greek because that's the language of the Eastern Roman Empire. That's the language of their overlords, and so on.
And they're likely their business as well, right? I mean, they had to do business in Greek.
Yes, why would you only serve customers who know one language? I mean, if you go to Jerusalem today and you go through the old city, you won't find a single one of those stallholders who can only serve you in one language.
Right. You could
They'll
speak
adapt.
German to them. You could speak Dutch to them. You could speak any of
Yeah,
those languages, and they would get it, right?
yeah.
Phenomenal, phenomenal.
Yeah, so I mean, Jesus is from a family that had a brief time in Egypt, of course, where they spoke Greek. His father, in earthly sense, is a carpenter who does contracts not just for the small village of Nazareth, where there might not be enough work, but further afield as well. And
Up the road at
you accept,
Sepphoris, right? No.
yeah, exactly. You know, so there's a Greek theatre there in Sepphoris or Roman theatre, and there's also Sepphoris is visible from Nazareth. So yes, that's how close it was for Jesus to go. Traditionally, of course, his mother came from that Greek-speaking area. It's necessary to go there, to go north if you're on the road to Cana, where they had connections. So of course this would be a place where Jesus would have gone.
So the idea that in this lesson on the Mount that Jesus spoke Greek because of his knowledge of the crowd is fascinating. I've not thought about it in those, but I see now what you're talking about. This assonance, in a sense, the rhyming of the front of the word that comes about that helps to sort of sharpen the rhetoric, but also to make it more memorable. It's fascinating.
Yes, and there are lots of other cases of this. So whether you're talking about good trees bearing good fruit and bad trees bearing bad fruit, there's lots of assonance in there. There are word plays where you talk about salt becoming stupid. This simply won't work in Aramaic. Or you talk about adding a cubit, which is a physical measurement, to your length of life, but it also happens to mean stature. And it needs to mean both in the context, because at the one level, he's talking about grass and how it grows. And it also is talking about how grass doesn't last very long. And so you have the physical and the temporal elements there, and that will work in Greek. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't do any teaching in Aramaic that day. If he's got crowds from around the place, he might teach in more than one language. And teaching is a back and forth process. It might be some degree of rote learning rather than, I think we tend to think of it as just a speech. I think that it's a set piece lesson.
Yeah. Fascinating. This is very interesting stuff. I love the sound of these languages when they're spoken well. You know, we first start learning to read a text like that. We struggle with pronunciation, but if we can continue with that and make that part of the discipline, not just translating, but also speaking it aloud, it'll add a great deal to our ability to memorize, but also our ability to understand how Jesus may have spoke that day. Thanks so much, Dr. Peter Williams, principal of Tyndale House. Thanks as well to Silvio Vasquez, Rebecca Larson, and Krista Sanchez for helping us edit and produce this podcast. Thanks to Phil Keggy for our music. If you want to study biblical languages, you ought to consider Wheaton College. Whether you're a graduate or undergraduate student, go to the website, www.wheaton.edu, and look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. If you have questions or comments about this podcast or any of our guests, we'd love to hear from you. Contact us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.